Hi, Melanie. Welcome again. I hope you've been well.
Well, and you, Nicole?
All good considering. So, as a lot of our past chats or most recent recordings that we've done, it's always been a bit focused on COVID. I think it's consumed a lot of our lives. I think people have had to adjust and reconsider everything that they've been doing. And our focus for April is about the healthier home. So, it's going to be our core focus. I hope you can
Yeah,
help us today.
sure. Let me give it a bash.
Good. Okay, so the first one, do you think it's possible to over-sanitize our spaces? Where do we draw the line, and are we driving ourselves crazy and overstressing, or are we on track and should carry on?
So, if there's anything that the year that was 2020 and going into 2021 taught us, it was that keeping your hands clean, washing your hands, is one of the best tools we have in reducing the spread of any type of disease or germ. So, whether it be COVID or even down to our slightly less threatening winter flu. But there's also such a thing as, and especially moms out there will know this. There's such a thing as keeping your environment too clean. By using too many bacterial soaps or too many hand sanitizers, then your immune system becomes sensitized to any irritant that comes its way. When we play outdoors and we're exposed to a certain degree of germs, our bodies build a degree of immunity. So we do need a level of germs in our lives, and obviously it's something really on the top of people's minds at the moment about sanitizing to death as much as we can. But there's no scientific evidence that suggests that temporarily stepping up your cleaning game in times such as these, like a pandemic, is going to be dangerous for your immune health.
And then talking about that, painted walls in your home, is this safe during COVID? I mean, to what extent is the safety level on painted walls?
So I would divide spaces up into two. So there would be public spaces. So I would not touch a painted wall. I would not touch any surface wall in a public space. So, for example, public bathrooms or doors going into shopping centres or offices or something like that. Don't touch anything. When it comes to your personal spaces, you have a lot more control over how well those surfaces have been looked after. And as long as you're using common sense and giving your walls a good wash and a sanitize, especially in areas where you touch often. So let's say you come in and you take your shoes off and you lean on the wall to take your shoes off before you've washed your hands as you've come in. As long as you're aware of those spaces and cleaning them often, you should be fine. So interestingly, there is some development, I think it's by the US Navy. They're looking at some antiviral and antimicrobial products that go into paint. And I believe that the production and the research around it has been upped quite substantially in light of the pandemic to bring it into more of a mass market type of product, but it's definitely not there yet. But in public spaces, touch nothing. And in personal spaces, as long as you're maintaining your normal cleanliness and sanitizing, you should be fine.
Okay, fantastic. And well, one of our favorites is talking about indoor plants. So we know that indoor plants make our spaces look more natural, but is it true that they actually remove toxins from the air as well?
It's absolutely true. So there's a good couple of toxins that come in our products that we use in living, working, and playing spaces, and they come in things like carpets, rugs, paint, fillers, resurfaces. Anything that's brought into a home has some fumes or chemical offing that it does. And the really common ones that you find in residential or commercial spaces are things like formaldehyde, VOC, which is volatile organic compounds, your biological pollutants, carbon monoxide, if your living spaces are close to a garage, for example, nitrogen oxides, pesticides coming in from your outdoors, disinfectants. All of those sorts of things affect our health in our living, working, and playing spaces. And I'm sure you would have heard of sick building syndrome, where buildings, particularly much older buildings that haven't been revamped and been brought up to speed, they will have something called sick building syndrome, where the users of those buildings will often be unproductive, their number of sick days will be higher, those sorts of things. And it's actually those compounds that are causing that sick building syndrome. And it causes things like allergies, headaches, fatigue, lack of concentration, all the way up to nervous disorders, cancers, and all of these result in a drop in productivity. So there's a list of about 50 indoor plants that are ideal for removing toxins from the air. And quite a lot of them we already have in our living spaces. You'll see them often in a nursery or in offices that you go into quite often. So a couple of them are things like palms. So you'll get the lady palm, a bamboo palm, a date palm, something called a Certina palm. Rubber plants. Rubber plants are very often found in commercial spaces. The Dracania and the Philodendron, those you'll recognize. The ficus or the fiddle-leaf fig. A Boston fern, it's a very common type of fern. The peace lily, the one that's got a beautiful white sail on it. And Nicole, you and I have spoken about this previously, is there's been this massive upsurge in a design trend called Biophilic Design. And this is all about bringing nature back into the spaces that we live, work, and play in. And a big portion of Biophilic Design is how to incorporate plants into your spaces, because they're so good for our psychological, mental, as well as our physiological systems. And physiological will be their ability to clean the air for us.
So I just wanted to know, I mean, now that we're all going to rush out and buy plants, is there a space that can have too many plants?
It comes down to the design. So let's think of, for example, a lawyer's office, a very upmarket, sleek, modern lawyer's office. You're probably not going to stick something like a palm or a peace lily into a space like that, because the design structure or the shape of those plants doesn't lend itself to the environment. You need something really sort of strong and upright and minimalistic, something like we know it in South Africa as a mother-in-law's tongue. It's a very straight, unassuming type of indoor plant. It's excellent for pollutants. Whereas if you had a, let's say you were in a office for a plant company, and you had a meeting in the office. It was a big nursery chain like Garden Shop, and you had a meeting at their head office. Then it would be really appropriate to have as many plants as the floor space, desk space, and shelf space would allow. And so it really depends on the space that you're going for. And, you know, when we teach our students around design, there's a whole style match that works with plants as well. So match your plants very much to the type of environment that you're in.
We all love being barefoot on carpets, but has COVID put an end to wall-to-wall carpeting? I would say yes, and come purchase tiles. But honestly speaking,
I am your voice of logic and reason here, and I'm going to agree with you to a degree. So carpets, traditional carpets, let's assume we're talking traditional carpets, wall-to-wall fitted carpets. These are a bigger issue than just COVID. And the bigger issue is we don't realize over time how dirty they're getting and how much dust they're gathering and what's in them. And if you've ever been on site when a wall-to-wall carpets have been removed from a site, your lungs will start to close up a little bit. So for me, carpets tend to be a little bit bigger issue than just COVID. They gather dust, they gather pollutants. You can't always clean them as much as you would something like tiles. So they were a really big problem with people or children with allergies or respiratory issues. There's a cost factor as well. So you need to clean them, and you also need to do professional cleaning on occasion, which can be quite pricey. When it comes to COVID and other infectious diseases, the life cycle of viruses is very much dependent on humidity, temperature, and the porosity of a surface. So carpets are not necessarily absorbent of something like COVID because they need a little bit more humidity to be able to thrive in that kind of environment. But there's lots of other issues that come with carpets. So I'm with you. I would go for tiles. Beautiful woodlook tile. You're going to get a stunning look.
Okay, so wearing shoes or removing shoes at the door before walking in, where do you stand on this issue?
For me, personally, I am eternally barefoot. So as I come in the front door, whether it's the middle of winter or steaming summer, I'm always barefoot. So for me, my preference is to be barefoot inside. One thing I would caution is, particularly now, is bringing germs in from outside. You don't know what you've walked in. You don't know what germs your shoes are carrying. So maybe for now, while we're watching COVID, maybe leave your shoes outside. But it really does come down to a personal preference.
Okay, one of our customers, a mom with a young family, bought a house with parquet flooring before COVID hit us in 2020. She's now having nightmares about the cost and effort of pulling it all up and replacing it with tiles. Please advise.
If you have parquet flooring, it's in good condition, it's been looked after, that stuff is gold. And you cannot achieve a similar sound or a feeling in an interior space like you can with parquet flooring. So absolutely, if they are in good condition, do not pull them up, virus or no virus. So it's the same principle applies as our first question around, are we over sanitizing? So just make sure that you're cleaning them properly. So particularly with hardwood parquet flooring, they'll have gaps in between. So vacuum them with a soft bristle brush to get the dust and debris out of the gaps. You can microfiber mop them to keep them clean, and you can sanitize them in that process as well. When it comes to mopping, don't use too much water because the wood will absorb, they'll become damp and warp. There's a lot of really good products on the market that you can clean hardwood floors with, and just sanitize them like you would in any other painted wall surface or any other tile surface that you're looking after at the moment. But if they're in good condition, you are so fortunate, and keep those.
So as you know, we've been in the market for a home, and I've actually seen 2 houses with parquet flooring that must be 40 years old, and just your emotional remnants around it and the history, and you just know the love that's been walked onto that floor. So I think it's also an emotional attachment to it as well.
I would never recommend to a client to pull up parquet flooring if it's salvageable. And also, if you have a look at the price of parquet flooring, if you've ever priced finding spare parts or spare planks or spare squares to fix parquet flooring, you'll realize that it's worth its weight in gold.
One of our regular customers has a son with asthma. What's the best advice to keep her about keeping his room safe as possible?
So this is where I would say absolutely no carpets because of the dust and respiratory issues, and absolutely go the tiles route. So when it comes to respiratory issues, it's more of you've got to make the initial plan, and then there's quite a lot of maintenance that you've got to do along the way. So you've got to do things like remove all forms of textiles. So if you have curtains, replace them potentially for non-fabric blinds. If you have a headboard, an upholstered headboard, replace it with something like a wood headboard. If your child is young enough to have stuffed animals, make sure they are washed on a very high temperature to kill any mites in it. Your mattresses are going to need to be vacuumed and demited regularly. Also, in those sorts of spaces, you'll need to go for those low VOC paints. You'll usually find a low VOC paint in specialist ranges in your hardware store. It'll usually come in like a baby section. So those are paints with less fumes coming off them, so it doesn't impact respiratory issues. Things like down duvets or pillows, you're going to need to look at synthetic. Pets, depending on what they're allergic to, pets may need to sleep outside of the bedroom. And mites and asthma loves humidity. So the higher the humidity level, the worse the respiratory effect. So if you can keep your humidity down below 50%, that's going to help them as well.
Okay, so mood uplifting is very important in these troubled times. We're all trying to keep our families calm as possible. How does lighting affect our moods?
So it goes back to what we were talking about earlier, biophilic design, this connection to nature that we as human beings need to have in our living, working, and playing spaces in order to function optimally, mentally, physically, and from a brain processing point of view. And one of the big factors in biophilic design is lighting. So, when the industrial age started, and all the way through until recently, we used to work in these little white boxes, these little white cubicles with no light, no color, no texture, no stimulation and data processing. And that was where sick people and sick buildings come from. So biophilic design, one of the really important factors of it is they talk about the need for natural light and what it does to our body. So we need to be able to see natural light. For a couple of reasons. The most obvious that we all know is vitamin D, builds our immunity. It also, natural light, it affects our cognitive, psychological, and our physical health. So things like we need to, as human beings, when we're sitting in a showroom like you are today, or a home office like I am today, or a school environment, an online school environment, we need to be able to see the movement of shadows naturally through the day. So I know that it's afternoon because the shadow is over there. And what that does is it regulates our internal clocks and affects our circadian rhythms. So our circadian rhythms are the biological rhythm that affects our sleeping patterns. So if you don't have access to natural light for the majority of your working day, you'll find that your circadian rhythm is off and you won't be sleeping as well as you should be for optimum health, which will then be affecting your immunity. So it all links back to each other. So, there's big things like building orientation and understanding the sun angles when you are building or renovating it. That's when you need a lot of professional help. There's architects and specialists who specialize in light. But if you don't have access to it, there's other ways around it. So you can use artificial light. There's certain full spectrum light bulbs which simulate daylight. I don't know if you've seen those. It's like an alarm clock. It changes color, and what it does is with the sunrise, it changes color. So that's almost a circadian alarm clock. What it's doing is it's replicating the natural light so that your body will see it and will automatically wake up with that light. So you can use full spectrum light bulbs. You can use things like mirrors in spaces to reflect, like dark corners to reflect light into them. If you're in a space that has very little natural light, avoid painting it in a dark tone. Try and create the perception of as much light as possible. Try and use glossy surfaces rather than very matte, dark surfaces. Bring low light tolerant houseplants in. So a lot of the indoor plants, particularly your mother-in-law's tongue and your peace lily, those function very nicely in low light. That's what they're designed for. And your body will respond to those. Keep your windows unobstructed. So don't sit with the blinds down all day. Open up the window, get fresh air and fresh light, natural light if you can.
So if I can just touch base on that, within our showrooms, we are surrounded by fluorescent lighting. Number one, because our product just looks amazing in this light, and it really does add value to our own products, especially our sandware, a lot of our tiles. So if we're in the showroom from morning to evening, are you saying that we should be more into the natural light, maybe step outside for a bit?
In most spaces, you have different sources of light. So you have natural light, task light, and ambient light. And they all serve a different purpose. And the ideal working, living, or playing space would have a combination of all three. So your fluorescent lights in your showrooms, they serve a very functional purpose. They're there to illuminate the space and to show off the product to its best ability. Fluorescent lights are not necessarily good for human beings on the long-term scale, particularly our eyes or people who have epilepsy, or because they have a certain frequency to them. And that said, your showrooms have quite a lot of natural light. So all of the showrooms I've been into of yours, they all have that bank of windows at the top that are open, and they let quite a lot of natural light in. So you've got unnatural light, your fluorescence, and you've got your natural light, and you're combining the two. And then you'll have something like task lighting. So for example, it will be a lamp on a showroom display, or a specific area, or to highlight a poster, or whatever the case may be. So you'll have, and that will focus light specific on that area. So in terms of your showrooms, you actually you're not too badly off as users of the space, because by nature your showrooms have quite a lot of natural light. That said, I would suggest a couple of times a day everybody goes out and get some natural light out there, go and absorb some vitamin D, because also what's happening in our daily work and our daily tasks is a lot of us. So you on your laptop, or the salespeople with their product, or your admin guys with their computers, is they're looking here all the time, and your eyes don't have a chance to rest. And this comes up in a biophilic design as well, is we need something called perspective. So you need to be able to lift your eyes away from what you're doing, and to be able to gaze long distance. So it relaxes your eyes away from what they were doing, but also being able to have perspective gives us a sense of safety. Knowing that there's it comes from our caveman days. There's a enclosure behind you, being the showroom, and then you've got perspective to look out over however far you can see. So it's a really, really good idea from a mental health and a physical health point of view to go outside to get vitamin D, but also to be able to look into the distance.
Okay, and then I think we've saved the best for last. I think I quite like this question. With healthier homes on the rise during COVID and everyone fighting the virus with sanitizing protocols, what's your feeling on the 5-second rule of dropped food? I mean, has this window closed forever? I love that one. What are your thoughts?
Okay, so 5-second rule. So if I'm in a public space, even pre-COVID, please don't pick up anything off the floor. No 5-second rule in a public space. You don't know who's walked there, what's on their shoes, what's been there, when last it was clean. So public spaces is a no. If you're in your own home and you know your level of cleanliness and sanitization, if you're not immunocompromised and you're not pregnant or any of those sort of slightly health marginalized conditions, 5-second rule. The 5-second rule is a bit of a combination of a myth and a fact. So it is a myth, the 5-second rule, but there's a little bit of fact to it. So there's 3 factors that dictate whether we should be picking up that food and putting it in our mouth or not. So number 1 is the moisture content of the food. So for example, something that's very high in moisture, and they ran the tests with watermelon, which is as moist as you can possibly get. Okay, the watermelon was one of the highest contaminated foods, 5-second or no 5-second, and it's got to do with its moisture content. The type of surface that you drop it on. So for example, if it's a clean tile, it was mopped that morning and you've dropped it on, you'll be fine. Carpet has a very low transfer rate. So there's not, it's not going to transfer a lot onto the food. Whereas your tile, stainless steel, wood, they transfer quite quickly. So make sure your floor was cleaned. And then, of course, contact time on the ground. How long is 5 seconds? Did your 2-year-old tell you that was 5 seconds? Or is it your version of 5 seconds? So in your own private space, it's your call. If you are healthy, it's not going to kill you.
Well, Melanie, thank you so much. That's all we've got for today. I'm excited to see what we're going to do next month. But until we see you, be well and be safe.
You too. Thanks so much, Nicole.